Jake Morrison felt the cold metal floor against his back as his eyes opened slowly. The cryo-sleep chamber hissed as it released the last of its frozen air. His body ached, and his mind felt fuzzy, but he was alive. He sat up and looked around the small medical bay of the ship New Frontier. Everything was quiet except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Aria. "Where is everyone?" Jake called out to the ship computer as he stood on shaky legs. His voice echoed in the empty corridor. "Captain, Morris and I regret to inform you that all crew members have died during the journey," the AI replied in its calm female voice. "Life support failed in sections 2 through 7 approximately 50 years ago. You survived because your chamber was connected to the emergency power grid." Jake felt his heart sink as the words hit him. 12 good people had died while he slept. He had been the mission commander for a simple colony ship heading to New Eden, but something had gone very wrong. He walked to the bridge and saw stars he did not recognize through the viewport. "Aria. Where are we?" he asked as he sat in the captain chair. "We are in the Kythera galaxy, approximately 200 light-years from our intended destination." "Navigation. Systems suffered critical damage during a solar storm in year 30 of our journey. We have been drifting for 170 years. Jake looked at the star charts on his screen. Nothing matched the maps from Earth. He was alone in a galaxy that might not have any friendly life at all. The fuel cells showed enough power for maybe 6 months of basic operations. Food supplies were even worse. Area scan for nearby planets. "That might have resources we need," Jake ordered. "Scanning now, Captain. I detect 17 planetary bodies within range. However, I must warn you that this galaxy appears to be inhabited by large predatory species. Long-range sensors show massive life forms on most worlds." Jake had been a military engineer before joining the colony mission. He knew how to fight. But fighting aliens the size of buildings was not something they taught at the academy. Still, he had no choice. The ship needed fuel, and he needed food. 3 days later, Jake guided the New Frontier toward a small asteroid field near a gas giant. Aria had detected metal deposits they could mine for ship repairs. As they approached the asteroids, Jake saw movement between the rocks. "Aria, what is that?" he asked, pointing at the scanner. "Unknown life forms, Captain. They appear to be organic, but are larger than our ship. I count at least 8 individual creatures." The creatures looked like massive wolves with metal teeth and glowing red eyes. Each one was the size of a shuttlecraft. They moved through space without any visible propulsion, but somehow they could fly between asteroids with perfect control. "They are approaching us, Captain," Aria warned. "Based on their movement patterns, I believe they view us as prey." Jake felt fear creep up his spine, but he pushed it down. He had survived worse situations during the war on Mars. These space wolves might be big, but they were still animals. Animals could be outsmarted. "Aria, can you modify the mining lasers for combat use?" Jake asked, as he watched the creatures circle his ship. "Yes, Captain, but the power output will not be sufficient to penetrate their apparent armor plating." "We do not need to kill them all," Jake said with a grim smile. "We just need to convince them we are not easy prey." The first wolf creature dove at the New Frontier with its jaws open. Jake fired the modified laser directly into its mouth where there was no armor. The creature screamed and pulled back, but 3 more attacked from different angles. Jake flew the ship into the asteroid field where the larger creatures had trouble following. He used the rocks as cover and picked off the wolves one by one. When they tried to surround him, he collapsed part of an asteroid to block their path. When they split up to hunt him, he used the ship sensor array to track them and set ambushes. After 2 hours of fighting, only 3 wolves remained. The largest one, with silver fur and scars across its face, howled at Jake's ship. The sound carried through space somehow, and Jake felt it in his bones. "That one is the pack leader," Jake said to himself. "If I can beat him, the others might leave us alone." The silver wolf charged straight at the ship with no tricks or tactics. Jake waited until the last second, then fired all his remaining laser power at a large asteroid above the wolf. The rock fell and crushed the creature under tons of metal and ice. The two remaining wolves looked at their dead leader, then at Jake. "Ship!" They howled once more and disappeared into deep space. "Well done, Captain," Arya said. "You have survived your first encounter with the apex predators of this galaxy." Jake looked at the dead wolves floating among the asteroids. These creatures were just the beginning. If he wanted to survive in this galaxy, he would need to become something more than just another piece of prey. He would need to become a predator himself. 2 weeks after the wolf attack, Jake sat in his captain chair, staring at fuel readings that made his stomach hurt. The new frontier had enough power for maybe 10 more days. The food situation was even worse. He had found some basic minerals in the asteroid field, but nothing that could keep him alive much longer. "Arya, show me the nearest planet with an atmosphere," Jake said while rubbing his tired eyes. "The closest habitable world is Zerion Prime," Arya replied. "It is a desert planet, with breathable air and some vegetation. However, Captain, I must warn you that it is controlled by a creature the local transmissions call Grimscale." Jake looked at the planet on his screen. It was brown and yellow with 2 small moons. Not exactly paradise, but it had air and maybe food. The ship intercepted some radio signals from the surface. Most were just animal sounds, but some seemed organized like a primitive communication system. "What do you know about this Grimscale?" Jake asked. "Based on sensor data, he appears to be a reptilian creature approximately 30 feet in length. His body shows massive armor plating and high energy readings. The smaller life forms on the planet seem to serve him." Jake knew he had no choice. He could die slowly in space or take his chances on a planet ruled by a giant armored lizard. At least on the planet, he might find food and water. The new frontier landed in a clearing near what looked like an abandoned mining facility. Jake put on his environmental suit and stepped outside. The air was hot and dry, but breathable. Red sand stretched in all directions, broken only by strange purple plants and metal structures left behind by some unknown civilization. Within an hour of landing, Jake saw them coming. A group of smaller reptile creatures about the size of large dogs approached his ship. They walked on 2 legs and carried crude spears made from scrap metal. Their leader was different from the others, with brighter scales and more intelligent eyes. "Human," the creature said in broken English. "You come to Grimscale territory. You must see Great One." Jake was surprised they could speak his language, but he supposed they had learned from intercepted Earth transmissions over the years. He followed the reptiles across the desert to a massive cave carved into a mountain. The entrance was decorated, with the bones of creatures Jake did not recognize. Inside the cave, Jake found himself face to face with Grimscale. The creature was even bigger than Arya had estimated. His armor looked like it was made from living metal that shifted and moved as he breathed. His eyes were intelligent but cold as winter. "So," Grimscale said in a voice like grinding stone, "another tiny creature comes to my world. You are smaller than most prey, but you might taste interesting." Jake realized that talking was not going to work. This creature saw him as nothing more than a snack. But Jake had noticed something important about the cave. It was built inside an old mining facility. The walls were reinforced with industrial equipment, and there were still active power conduits running through the ceiling. "I challenge you to single combat," Jake said loudly. "If you are truly the ruler of this world, then prove it." Grimscale laughed, which sounded like rocks falling down a cliff. "You amuse me, little human. Very well, I will play with you before I eat you." Jake had one advantage that Grimscale did not expect. He understood industrial equipment, and the lizard did not. As Grimscale charged forward with his massive jaws open, Jake rolled to the side and grabbed a power cable from the wall. The electricity coursed through the metal floor, and Grimscale stepped directly on it. The great lizard roared in pain and anger as the current ran through his armored body. Jake used the distraction to reach a control panel for the mining equipment. He activated the ore crushers and metal sorters that were still functional after all these years. Grimscale was tough, but he was also heavy. Jake led him deeper into the mining facility where the floor was designed to separate heavy materials from light ones. When Grimscale stepped on the sorting platform, Jake activated the system. The floor opened and dropped the lizard into a smelting chamber 50 feet below. Jake looked down at Grimscale, who was trapped in the metal chamber. The creature was still alive, but could not climb the smooth walls to escape. Jake found the controls for the smelting furnace and started the heating process. "You can surrender or you can cook," Jake called down to the trapped lizard. "Your choice." Grimscale struggled for several minutes as the temperature rose. Finally, he stopped fighting and looked up at Jake with something that might have been respect. "I yield, human," Grimscale said. "By the old laws, you are now ruler of this world." Jake shut off the heating system and used the crane to lift Grimscale out of the chamber. The great lizard was burned in several places, but still alive. Jake had won his first territory in this strange galaxy. Over the following days, Jake learned more about how this world worked. The smaller reptiles brought him food and information. Their leader was called Scales, and he seemed fascinated by human technology and tactics. Grimscale ruled through fear, Scales explained as they sat outside Jake's ship. "But you used thinking to defeat him. This is new for us." Jake began organizing the reptiles into work groups. Some gathered food while others repaired equipment. He taught them how to maintain the mining machines and how to process the metals they extracted. Within a week, Xerion Prime was producing more resources than it had in decades, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. Area had detected signals from other worlds in the system. There were bigger predators out there, and they would eventually come to see what had happened to Grimscale. Jake needed to be ready for them. He spent his evenings studying the intercepted transmissions from across the galaxy. 3 main groups seemed to control different regions. House Ironhide had been Grimscale faction, but there were also House Deepmaw, which controlled the water worlds, and House Stormwing, which ruled the sky, planets. Jake looked up at the stars and knew that sooner or later he would have to face them all. 3 months after defeating Grimscale, Jake received a message that made his blood run cold. The transmission came from the ocean world of Aquanus Prime, and the voice belonged to something that called itself Admiral Tide Crusher of House Deepmaw. "Tiny surface dweller," the voice gurgled through the speakers like water draining from a bathtub. "You have taken what belongs to House Ironhide. This cannot stand. You will bring tribute to the deep waters or face the wrath of the abyss." Jake looked at the star charts with Scales standing beside him. Aquanus Prime was a water world 3 times the size of Earth, with oceans so deep that the bottom had never been mapped. House Deepmaw controlled 17 different water worlds across this sector of the galaxy. "What do you know about Tide Crusher?" Jake asked his reptilian advisor. "Great sea beast," Scales replied with fear in his voice. "Arms like ship tentacles, can create whirlpools that swallow whole fleets. No one has ever defeated House Deepmaw in water combat." Jake studied the tactical data Area had collected about the water worlds. Tide Crusher was described as a kraken-like creature spanning several city blocks. His fleet consisted of hundreds of smaller sea monsters that could survive in both water and space. Traditional weapons had little effect on creatures adapted to the crushing pressure of deep ocean trenches. "Then we will not fight them in the water," Jake said with a slight smile. Jake spent 2 weeks preparing for what everyone thought would be his last battle. He loaded the new frontier with mining equipment and basic supplies, then sent a message to Tide Crusher accepting the challenge. The meeting would take place near the gas giant Neptara, which orbited between Xerion Prime and Aquanus Prime. "You cannot win against creatures that large," Scales warned as Jake prepared to leave. "Maybe we should just pay tribute and hope they leave us alone." "Running away only delays the problem," Jake replied. "If we want to survive in this galaxy, we need to prove that humans cannot be pushed around." Jake flew toward Neptara with Tide Crusher massive fleet following behind him. The sea creatures moved through space like they were swimming through water. Their movements were graceful, but deadly. Jake could see Tidecrusher himself at the center of the formation, like a living asteroid with tentacles that stretched for miles. As they approached the gas giant, Jake did something unexpected. Instead of turning to fight, he dove straight into the planet atmosphere. Neptara was a swirling mass of dense gases with floating islands of solid matter scattered throughout the upper layers. "Coward!" Tidecrusher voice boomed across space. "You cannot hide in the gas clouds forever." But Jake was not hiding. For the past month, he had been secretly placing modified mining charges throughout Neptara atmosphere. The charges were designed to react with specific gas compounds found only in this planet. When activated, they would create artificial gravity wells and explosive chain reactions. Tidecrusher and his fleet followed Jake into the dense atmosphere where visibility was limited and normal sensors did not work well. The sea creatures were used to the three-dimensional environment of deep oceans, but the swirling gases of Neptara were different. Their natural sonar abilities were confused by the chemical composition of the air. Jake led them deeper into the planet where he had positioned his trap. When Tidecrusher fleet was spread out across a wide area, Jake activated the first set of charges. Explosions bloomed throughout the gas clouds, creating temporary gravity fields that pulled the smaller creatures off course. The sea monsters found themselves fighting against artificial currents and pressure waves they could not predict or control. Jake used his superior knowledge of the environment to strike at isolated groups while avoiding the main fleet. Tidecrusher realized too late that he had been lured into a carefully prepared battlefield. The massive Kraken tried to retreat to open space, but Jake triggered a second wave of explosions that created a barrier of gravitational distortion around the planet. "Face me directly, tiny human!" Tidecrusher roared as his tentacles thrashed through the gas clouds. "Stop hiding behind your tricks!" Jake knew he had to end this quickly before Tidecrusher adapted to the environment. He guided the massive creature toward a gas pocket he had saturated with corrosive compounds over the past several weeks. The chemicals were harmless until exposed to the bioelectric fields that all sea creatures generated. When Tidecrusher entered the prepared area, his own electrical systems triggered a massive chemical reaction. The gases around him became acidic and began eating through his natural armor. The great Kraken screamed in pain and rage as his protective shell dissolved. Jake did not wait for Tidecrusher to die. He flew close to the weakened creature and used his ship mining laser to target the vital organs now exposed by the acid damage. 3 precise shots ended the life of the most feared predator in the water worlds. The remaining sea creatures stopped, fighting immediately. Without their admiral, they were just animals again. Jake transmitted a message to the surviving fleet using the same authority in his voice that had once commanded soldiers on Mars. "I am Jake Morrison, ruler of Zarian Prime and now commander of House Deepmaw. Any creature that serves me will be fed and protected. Any creature that opposes me will share Tidecrusher fate." One by one, the sea monsters signaled their surrender. Jake had won his second major victory against impossible odds. But he knew the hardest fight was still ahead. House Stormwing controlled the Sky Worlds, and their leader, Skyripper, was said to be the most intelligent of all the great predators. Jake flew back toward Zarian Prime with a fleet of sea creatures following behind him. Scales was waiting at the landing platform with the expression of amazement on his reptilian face. "How did you defeat the master of the deep waters?" Scales asked. "Same way humans have always won battles," Jake replied as he climbed out of his ship. "We changed the rules of the game." That night, Jake looked up at the stars and knew that news of his victory would spread quickly across the galaxy. Soon, every predator would know that a human had defeated 2 of the great houses. Some would come to challenge him, and others would come to serve him. Either way, Jake was ready for them. The attack came from above without warning, just as Jake had expected. Skyripper of House Stormwing did not bother with messages or challenges. the massive flying creature simply appeared in orbit around Xerion Prime with a storm cloud that covered half the planet. Jake watched from his command center as lightning bolts the size of skyscrapers struck the surface. Each bolt carried enough energy to power a city for a year. The creature responsible for the storm was barely visible through the clouds, but sensor readings showed something with a wingspan measured in kilometers. Area analysis, Jake called out as he tracked the movement patterns of the electrical storm. Sky Ripper appears to be a pteranodon-type creature enhanced with bioelectric capabilities, the AI replied. His wings generate the storm system, and he can direct lightning strikes with surgical precision. Estimated length from beak to tail is 12 kilometers. Scales cowered behind a metal barrier as another lightning strike hit near the command center. No one has ever fought House Stormwing in the air and survived, he said with terror in his voice. They control the sky above 30 different worlds. Jake studied the tactical display showing Sky Ripper flight patterns. The great bird was circling the planet at high altitude, using the storm as both weapon and shield. Traditional aircraft could not operate in those conditions, and ground-based weapons could not penetrate the electromagnetic interference. Then we will not fight him in the air either, Jake said as he began planning his most ambitious battle yet. Over the next 3 days, Jake evacuated most of his people to underground shelters while secretly implementing a plan that required precise timing across multiple star systems. He had been building a network of allies since defeating Tide Crusher, and now it was time to use them. Jake sent coded messages to his contacts on 17 different worlds. Each message contained instructions for placing modified mining equipment in specific locations. To outside observers, it looked like normal industrial expansion, but Jake was actually building the largest trap in galactic history. The key was Sky Ripper bioelectric field. The creature generated massive amounts of electrical energy, which created a unique electromagnetic signature that could be detected across several light years. Jake had Area analyze this signature until she could predict exactly where Sky Ripper would be at any given moment. When everything was ready, Jake sent a message directly to Sky Ripper using emergency broadcast frequencies. Great Lord of the Storms, I challenge you to single combat above the world of Forgecrest. Bring your lightning, and I will bring mine. Forgecrest was an industrial world covered with metal refineries and manufacturing plants. It was also the center of Jake New Communications Network. Hidden among the factories were dozens of EMP pulse generators disguised as standard mining equipment. Sky Ripper arrived at Forgecrest with a storm system that turned day into night. The great bird circled the planet while lightning strikes destroyed everything on the surface that looked remotely threatening. But Jake was not on the surface. He waited in orbit aboard the New Frontier until Sky Ripper was positioned exactly where he needed him to be. Then Jake activated his trap. All 17 worlds in his network powered up their hidden EMP generators simultaneously. The coordinated electromagnetic pulse created an interference pattern that disrupted electrical activity across the entire star system. Sky Ripper shrieked in pain as his bioelectric systems went haywire. The storm clouds dissipated, and the great bird found himself falling toward Forgecrest's surface with wings that no longer responded to his commands. He crashed into the industrial complex with an impact that registered on seismic sensors 3 systems away. Jake landed his ship near the crash site and found Sky Ripper buried under tons of twisted metal. The creature was still alive, but his wings were damaged and he could not generate electricity. For the first time in centuries, the Lord of Storms was grounded. Impossible, Sky Ripper gasped as Jake approached. No surface dweller has ever brought down a Sky Lord. Your mistake was thinking that surface dwellers could only fight on the surface, Jake replied. Humans fight wherever they need to fight. What followed was not really a battle, but a test of endurance. Sky Ripper was still dangerous, even without his electrical powers. His beak could crush steel and his talons could slice through armor. But he was wounded and exhausted while Jake was fresh and mobile. For 3 days, they fought across the ruins of Forgecrest Industrial Complex. Jake used hit-and-run tactics, striking at Sky Ripper when the creature was distracted, then disappearing into the maze of destroyed buildings. He targeted the bird major tendons and nerve clusters with surgical precision. Sky Ripper had never faced an opponent who could match his intelligence and exceed his patience. The great bird was used to overwhelming enemies with raw power, but Jake forced him into a battle of strategy and stamina. Hour by hour, the mighty creature grew weaker, while Jake remained focused and determined. On the third day, Sky Ripper collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. He looked up at Jake with eyes that showed both rage and grudging respect. "You fight like no creature I have ever encountered," Sky Ripper admitted. "Your species is small and weak, but your minds are dangerous beyond measure." "Do you yield, Jake?" asked while keeping his weapon trained on the bird vital areas. "I yield to the human who conquered the storms," Sky Ripper replied. "You have earned the right to command House Stormwing." Jake had Aria send medical drones to treat Sky Ripper injuries while he considered what came next. He now controlled 3 of the major power blocks in this galaxy. His network included ground forces from House Ironhide sea creatures from House Deepmaw and flying units from House Stormwing. But as he stood among the ruins of Forgecrest, Jake knew his biggest challenge was still ahead. Defeating the established powers had been difficult, but holding them together would be even harder. These creatures had been enemies for thousands of years. Teaching them to work together would require all of his leadership skills. Scales arrived on Forgecrest 2 days later with a supply convoy and news from across the galaxy. "The wild packs are stirring," he reported. "Creatures that serve no house are beginning to unite. They say a human who defeats the great lords must be stopped before he grows too powerful." Jake looked up at the stars where he knew other predators were watching and planning. His string of victories had made him famous, but fame could be dangerous when every creature in the galaxy saw you as either a threat or an opportunity. "Let them come," Jake said quietly. "We will be ready for them." The first sign of trouble came as a whisper in the dark. Jake was reviewing supply reports in his command center when Aria detected something that made her voice change tone. "Captain, I am receiving reports of coordinated attacks across 7 different systems," the AI announced. "The strikes are precise and targeted. This is not random predator behavior." Jake pulled up the tactical display and felt his stomach tighten. Someone had been studying his methods and learning from his victories. The attacks hit his supply lines and communication relays with surgical precision. Whoever was leading this campaign understood human tactics better than any alien should. Shadowfang. Scales whispered the name like a curse. "The silver wolf you thought you killed in the asteroid field. He survived and has been watching you ever since." Jake remembered the pack leader from his first battle in this galaxy. The creature had seemed dead when the asteroid crushed him, but apparently these space wolves were harder to kill than he had thought. Now Shadowfang was back and he had learned everything there was to know about fighting humans. Over the following weeks, Jake found himself fighting a war unlike any he had experienced. Shadowfang had united every wild pack and rogue predator in the galaxy into something called the Great Hunt. These creatures had no fixed territories to defend and no supply lines to protect. They struck without warning, then vanished into the void. The Great Hunt included creatures Jake had never seen before. Shadow stalkers that could bend light around themselves, making them nearly invisible. Void hunters that lived in the empty space between stars and could appear anywhere without warning. Quantum predators that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "They are using our own tactics against us," Jake said during a strategy meeting with his house commanders. Sky Ripper had recovered from his injuries and now served as Jake Air Force leader, while Tidecrusher replacement Admiral Deep Current controlled the naval forces. "The wolf creature has studied every battle you have fought," Sky Ripper observed. "He knows how you think and how you plan. This puts us at a severe disadvantage." The situation grew worse when Shadowfang began targeting Jake allies directly. Scales was captured during a routine supply run to the outer colonies. 3 days later, Jake received a message that chilled him to the bone. human, Shadowfang voice carried across subspace with cold intelligence. You have corrupted the natural order of this galaxy. Predators should rule and prey should serve. Your system, where the weak work beside the strong, is an abomination. Jake could hear Scale's voice in the background calling out warnings about traps and ambushes. The loyal reptile was still alive, but probably not for long. I have your friends, and I have your allies, Shadowfang continued. Come to the Void Wastes alone and face me in single combat. Win and they live. Lose and watch your empire crumble as the galaxy returns to the old ways. The Void Wastes were a region of space where normal physics broke down due to ancient cosmic phenomena. Stars flickered in and out of existence while gravity flowed in impossible directions. It was the perfect place for a final confrontation between two very different philosophies. Jake knew it was a trap, but he also knew he had no choice. Shadowfang had proven he could strike anywhere at any time. The only way to end this war was to face the Wolf leader directly. You cannot go alone, Admiral Deepcurrent protested when Jake announced his decision. The Great Hunt will destroy you the moment you enter the Void Wastes. Then I will not go alone, Jake replied with a smile that surprised everyone in the room. But I will not take an army either. Jake spent 3 days sending secret messages to every world in his territory. The messages did not go to his house commanders or military leaders. Instead, they went to the smaller creatures that most predators ignored. The maintenance workers and food gatherers, the scouts and engineers, the species that had always been considered prey. When Jake's ship entered the Void Wastes, he was followed by hundreds of vessels carrying thousands of creatures that Shadowfang had never considered a threat. They came from every world Jake controlled, and they came willingly because he had shown them something they had never imagined possible. Shadowfang was waiting in the center of the Void Wastes with the entire Great Hunt arrayed behind him. The Silver Wolf had grown larger since their first encounter, and his pack now included creatures from across the galaxy. But as impressive as they looked, Jake forces outnumbered them 10-1. You brought prey animals to a predator fight, Shadowfang snarled as he studied Jake's unconventional army. This proves you have learned nothing about the true nature of power. I brought creatures who choose to fight, rather than creatures who fight because they have no choice, Jake replied. There is a difference. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Jake had not come to prove he was the strongest predator. He had come to prove that the concept of predator and prey was outdated. His forces included engineers who had built weapons from mining equipment, pilots who had learned to fight in the dangerous void environment, scientists who understood the cosmic phenomena better than anyone. Shadowfang realized too late that he was not fighting an army but a civilization. Every creature in Jake Force had a reason to be there beyond simple survival. They fought for the idea that strength came from cooperation rather than domination. The tide turned when Jake's smallest allies proved to be his most valuable. Tiny repair drones slipped through the Great Hunt defenses and disabled their ships from within. Scout creatures who had spent years mapping the Void Wastes guided Jake forces through gravitational anomalies that trapped their enemies. This is not how wars are supposed to be fought, Shadowfang roared as his carefully planned ambushes were detected and countered by creatures he had dismissed as irrelevant. That is exactly the point, Jake replied as he maneuvered his ship toward the Wolf Leader position. We are not fighting a war. We are building something better. The final confrontation took place on a fragment of solid matter floating in the void between dimensions. Jake and Shadowfang faced each other while their forces watched from a respectful distance. But this time Jake was not alone. Hundreds of creatures who had chosen to follow him stood ready to support their leader. You cannot defeat the natural order, Shadowfang said as he prepared for his final charge. Predators will always rule because that is the way of the universe. The universe is bigger than you think, Jake replied as he raised his weapon. And there is always room for something new. Shadowfang charged across the floating rock with claws extended and fangs bared. The silver wolf moved faster than anything that large should be able to move, but Jake was ready for him. At the last second, Jake stepped aside and let the wolf momentum carry him past. "You cannot run forever, human," Shadowfang snarled as he turned for another attack. "Eventually you will have to face me directly." "I am not running," Jake replied calmly. "I am thinking." Around them, the battle continued as thousands of creatures fought among the floating debris of the void wastes. But Jake had noticed something important about this final confrontation. Every creature on both sides was watching their leaders fight. The outcome of this personal battle would determine the fate of the entire galaxy. Shadowfang attacked again, with claws that could slice through steel armor. Jake dodged and rolled, using his smaller size and superior agility to stay out of reach. But he was not trying to wound the wolf. He was trying to prove a point. "Look around you, Shadowfang," Jake called out, as he avoided another swipe of the massive claws. "Look at who fights beside me." The wolf paused in his attack and saw what Jake wanted him to see. Creatures that had been enemies for thousands of years were working together. Reptiles from House Ironhide fought alongside sea creatures from House Deepmaw. Flying predators from House Stormwing coordinated their attacks with ground-based allies they had once hunted for food. "This is not natural," Shadowfang protested. "Predators do not cooperate with prey animals." "They do when they stop thinking of each other as predators and prey," Jake replied. "They do when they start thinking of each other as people." Jake had brought more than just an army to the void wastes. He had brought a vision of what the galaxy could become. Every creature fighting for him had chosen to be there because they believed in something better than the endless cycle of hunt and be hunted. Shadowfang seemed confused by this concept. His entire worldview was based on the idea that strength meant domination and weakness meant death. The sight of natural enemies working together challenged everything he believed about the universe. "You are trying to confuse me with words," the wolf said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "In the end, only the strong survive." "You are right," Jake agreed, which surprised everyone, including Shadowfang. "Only the strong survive, but you are wrong about what makes someone strong." Jake gestured toward his forces, where creatures of every size and type were supporting each other in battle. "A small creature becomes strong when it has friends who will fight beside it. A large creature becomes stronger when it protects those who cannot protect themselves." Shadowfang looked around the battlefield with growing uncertainty. His own forces were beginning to waver as they saw the effectiveness of Jake's coordinated army. The Great Hunt had always relied on individual strength and cunning, but they were being outfought by creatures who shared information and resources. "This cannot last," Shadowfang insisted. "Eventually they will turn on each other. It is the way of all predators." "Watch and learn," Jake said quietly. At that moment, Scales appeared on the floating rock, having escaped from his captors during the battle. The reptile was wounded and exhausted, but he carried weapons for Jake and information about Shadowfang's remaining forces. "I told you they would come for you," Scales said with a grin that showed his sharp teeth. "Every creature in the galaxy who has ever been called prey." Shadowfang stared at the loyal reptile with something like wonder. In his worldview, creatures only helped each other when they were forced to do so. The idea that someone would risk their life for a friend was completely foreign to him. "Why?" Shadowfang asked Jake. "Why do they follow you when you are smaller and weaker than most of them?" "Because I never asked them to follow me," Jake replied. "I asked them to work with me." The wolf leader seemed to struggle with this concept. Throughout the galaxy, power had always flowed from the apex predators down to everyone else. The idea that someone could lead by serving others was revolutionary. Jake saw the moment when Shadowfang's worldview began to crack. The wolf looked at the battle raging around them and saw something he had never noticed before. Jake's forces were not just fighting more effectively, they were fighting more joyfully. Creatures that had spent their entire lives in fear were experiencing the freedom that came from having allies they could trust. "I do not understand," Shadowfang admitted. "If you do not rule through fear, how do you maintain control?" "I do not control anyone," Jake said simply. "I just give them something worth fighting for." Shadowfang sat down heavily on the floating rock as the implications of this statement sank in. Around them, the battle was winding down as the great hunt forces surrendered or fled. Without their leader absolute certainty to guide them, they had lost the will to fight. "You have destroyed everything I believed," the wolf said quietly. "If predators and prey can work together, then what am I?" "You are whatever you choose to be," Jake replied. "That is what freedom means." Jake extended his hand toward the massive wolf in a gesture of friendship rather than dominance. After a long moment, Shadowfang reached out with one claw and gently touched Jake's fingers. "Teach me," Shadowfang said. "Show me how to build this new galaxy you have imagined." 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Galactic Council station and watched ships from hundreds of different worlds arrive for the first interspecies conference in galactic history. The station floated in neutral space, where no single house had ever claimed territory. Shadowfang had become one of his most effective ambassadors. The former pack leader now spent his time convincing other wild predators to join the growing alliance. His combination of natural authority and hard-earned wisdom made him perfect for the job. "The Arachnid Collective has agreed to share their web-spinning technology," Scales reported as he joined Jake at the viewing port. "In exchange, House Deepmaw will provide protection for their mining operations." Jake smiled as he watched a massive, spider-like ship dock alongside vessels from the three great houses. The Arachnids had been considered monsters by most of the galaxy, but they were actually brilliant engineers. Like many species, they had been judged by their appearance rather than their capabilities. "Any word from the Outer Rim territories?" Jake asked. "The Crystalline Empire wants to join, but they are concerned about maintaining their cultural independence," Scales replied. "They have never dealt with organic life forms before." "Arrange a meeting," Jake said. "Everyone who wants to participate should have a voice in how this works." The Galactic Concordat was not perfect. There were still conflicts and misunderstandings between species that had been enemies for millennia. But for the first time in galactic history, those conflicts were being resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. Jake had learned something important during his journey from Lost Colony ship captain to galactic leader. The strongest predator was not always the one with the biggest teeth or the loudest roar. Sometimes the strongest predator was the one who chose not to hunt at all. "What do you think?" Jake asked Shadowfang as the wolf joined them at the viewing port. "Will it work?" "It is working already," Shadowfang replied as he watched ships from dozens of different species working together to build something new. "You have shown us that there is more than one way to be strong." Jake looked out at the galaxy he had not conquered, but had instead helped to transform. Somewhere among those stars, other lost travelers might be struggling to survive in a hostile universe. But now they would find a galaxy where cooperation was valued more than domination, and where every creature had the chance to become something greater than what they were born to be. The human who had conquered a galaxy of beasts had discovered that the greatest victory was teaching others that they did not need to be conquered at all.